We're live, go ahead.
Good morning. I am very excited to welcome this morning's speaker, Les Horning. Les is a colleague of mine at Mennonite Central Committee. Les Horning comes to us this morning from Harrisonburg, Virginia, where he calls home, but he grew up in Ephrata, PA, and was formed in faith at Metzler Mennonite Church in Akron, Pennsylvania. He is currently working as the Donor Relations Director for MCC East Coast. In order to get there, though, he has worked as a farmhand, a chicken catcher, a nursing home orderly, a carpenter, a house painter, a research chemist, a pastor, a school bus driver, and a seminary admissions director. You come to us with so much really interesting experience. He thinks that one day he will figure out what he wants to be when he grows up. Les is married to Crystal, a therapist, and they have two grown daughters, Anya and Alana, both of whom are social workers. Les enjoys photography, writing poetry, creating things with wood, and listening to people. Thank you so much, Les. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's good to be here, and in addition to listening to people, I enjoy talking to people. So I'm thrilled for the opportunity to share with you here this morning about Mennonite Central Committee. You'll see the title I have, the Mennonite Central Committee, does the center still hold? And as I work through, you'll see why I chose that title. I want to start with a little history of Mennonite Central Committee and how it was founded. Interestingly enough, little fun fact in case this ever comes up in any trivia game that you might play in. Mennonite Central Committee, and I think I've done my research carefully enough, Mennonite Central Committee is the second oldest faith-based relief and development agency in the U.S. Would anybody like to guess what the oldest faith-based relief and development agency in the U.S. is?
Red Cross? Faith-based? Catholic, Jerry?
Yeah, the question is Red Cross a faith-based? It would be older. I'm thinking of kind of denominational centered. So faith-based, Red Cross might be there, but there's one other, not Catholic Relief Services. It's our friends, pun fully intended, our friends at the American Friends Service Committee. Was formed in 1917. MCC, Mennonite Central Committee, was formed in 1920. So I want to share just briefly, because I think this is important. So in 1917, a lot was happening here in the U.S. World War I was winding down. We had the Spanish flu pandemic. We had people arguing about whether or not to wear masks. And one thing that was happening in the Mennonite world is, as you may know, Mennonites are historically pacifists. So by and large, Mennonites did not participate in World War I, but as they were seeing the devastation that the war brought, they said, we need to help. We need to show that our commitment to peace is not just for ourselves, but we need to put this peace to work to serve others. So they said, okay, we did not fight in the war, but we can help heal from the war. And so you had numerous Mennonite groups across the U.S. form these little, what they called war sufferers relief committees. And they did a little bit with aid to Europe and other places. And there was also a famine happening in India right about this time, so there were Mennonites forming to help with that. And they said, so that began in 1917, 1918. They said, we can do more. But then in 1920, actually 1919, a crisis emerged, and there was a famine and civil war happening in another part of the world. And I'll show you in just a bit where these came from. Mira probably knows this story. So this other country sent a delegation to the U.S. and said, please help us. We're starving. They were literally starving. So these various little Mennonite groups from across the U.S. who before did not work together. Some of it was geography. Some of it was suspicion about the theology. Can I work with those Mennonites? Are they the true Mennonites? I know Presbyterians don't have that issue, but we Mennonites do. But this crisis came along and they said, we can do more together than we can apart. So let's work together to solve this problem. and the problem was Ukraine. So Mennonite Central Committee got its start in 1920 when there was a crisis in Ukraine. There was civil war affecting Ukraine, and you can see the map there in red. And they said, we need to work together. So these various Mennonite groups got together, and they said, we need a central committee to kind of handle all the resources, all the funds, all the food that we collect. So let's have a central committee. We'll call it the Mennonite Central Committee. And that's the very imaginative way that Mennonite Central Committee came up with its name. They went to Ukraine. This is in 1922, a feeding station in Ukraine. At the height of Mennonite Central Committee's assistance in Ukraine, they were feeding 25,000 meals a day. The crisis was averted, and MCC, a little tidbit. After the crisis in Ukraine was averted and the famine had passed and people were on their way again, this group that formed this central committee said, our work is done, we can disband, we can go into our separate corners and continue our little work. But there were other voices that said, no, remember, we can do more together than we can apart, let's stay together. And so I thank God that MCC did stay together, because 100 years later, MCC was once again feeding people in Ukraine. I'm struck with, so this is 2022. Let me just go back, just the similarity. 100 years later, we humans still haven't figured out how to get along. We're still fighting, and there's still need for this work of helping folks in need. Well, so that's how Mennonite Central Committee got started back in the 1920s. And over the years then, our mission can kind of be summed up in this phrase: relief, development, peace, in the name of Christ. I want to say just a little bit about that in the name of Christ part. So when MCC sends materials into other countries, into other regions, often that phrase "in the name of Christ" is on the boxes, on whatever, on the containers. Some years ago, there was a question about whether or not that phrase "in the name of Christ" is an offense if we're delivering food into, say, a Muslim area or a Hindu area or other faith. And there was sincere and deep questions and wrestling about that. My understanding is that in that wrestling, they went to some of our partners, our Muslim partners in, let's say, Jordan, for example, or something. And the word we got back was, no, you need to keep that. We know who you are. We know you're a Christian group. And any attempt to hide that would actually lessen our respect and our appreciation for you. We know who you are, own it and name it, and we'll continue to work together. And so in the name of Christ continues. So let me just highlight what I mean by relief, development, and peace in terms of the work we do. Not all of the work we do kind of fits neatly into those categories, but I'll try. So relief, of course, is when there's an immediate crisis, say Ukraine, where MCC is involved, Syria, other situations where people, perhaps there's a hurricane or a tsunami or a earthquake, and people need stuff right now, so that's relief. Development is what can we do long term to help a community thrive in the context where they are, and peace, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. What can we do to bring peace? Now, and that part is important, because as we look back into the situations where relief is needed, a lot of times, sometimes it's natural disasters that I just mentioned. Sometimes it's human disasters, conflict. And so we can say, okay, yeah, there's conflict. We need to bring relief into it, or we can say, let's start thinking about the situations that caused this conflict in the first place. Are there ways we can address it? And so let's work at some root causes, and peace does that. For example, and this is a relief. This is a woman named Fanis who lives in Bingo, Haiti. during the earthquake in 2018. MCC was there with these comforters. And just let me note this comforters, very bright, very colorful, handmade by people from across the U.S. Someone asked one time, wouldn't it be easier and more efficient just to go to a manufacturer and get blankets that are manufactured by machines? It'd be more efficient, it'd be cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. We could do that, or we could, the comforters that you see Fannis holding here, allows people to participate. So elderly women, like my 84-year-old mother who can't get out much, but she can put these comforter tops together with these bright, colorful materials, and she told me she prays over them each time because not knowing where they'll go. So comforters that are handmade give people who otherwise couldn't go and serve a way to serve and a way to connect. So that's relief. Let me just say something else about how MCC operates. I could show you this picture and just talk about someone receiving a comforter. But I'm telling you her name. Her name is Fannis, and that's something that MCC more recently has really worked at. To name these people, to give these people dignity. They're not just objects, they're human beings with life and purpose. And so whenever we can, in any presentation, we like to name the people that are part of our work. So this is Fannis. Here's a water pump, water at a refugee camp in Chad, where you see the mechanic Mohammed Mokhtar, who's in charge of maintaining that. Is this development? So we work with partners to set up a well and a water source in this refugee camp in Chad, making sure they have clean running water. And then that's another, water, access to clean running water. Clean water is a key thing in communities around the world, and MCC's part of that. I want to note the refugee camp. So a lot of the work that MCC does involves refugees or internally displaced people. Do you understand the difference between a refugee and an internally displaced people? So internally displaced people are people who have to leave their home, but are still within their own country. Refugees have to leave their home, but they're in another country. Do you know how many, if we add all this together, internally displaced and refugees, how many people fit in that category in the U.S., in the world right now? Anybody have a guess?
Tens of millions.
Yeah.
Tens of millions. The last research I saw, things were right at about 117 million people, internally displaced and refugees. And again, some of that is due to conflict, some of it is due to climate change, climate effects, and I'll be talking a little bit about that. But that, working with refugees and internally displaced people is also a driver for some of MCC's work. So peace. How do we work at peace? I love this photo and this story. Isa Mbolo, a founder of a peace club in Zambia. This was in 2009. And let me just say a word about, not just about Isa in particular, because I don't know him personally, but in general, when MCC, when Mennonite Central Committee is working in an area whether it's Zambia or Chad or Haiti, or any other place that we serve, we always find local partner groups to work with. That's very important for our work, and that's a shift. It wasn't always that way. When it used to be MCC, if you were an MCC worker, you went as a North American into Zambia or Chad or Haiti or wherever, and you were there to do work, and it was good work, and you worked with the local community. But over the years, there was a shift for MCC that said, when we go into an area, we're going to find partner groups to work with. Because these partner groups, these local groups who are already working in an area, they know best what this community needs, and so we're gonna listen to them. We're gonna get our guidance and direction from them. And also, when MCC takes on a program or begins a program, they always have an eye toward sustainability, and that's both environmental sustainability as well as economic and human sustainability. Meaning, MCC recognizes their presence is not going to be there forever, and so when they leave or when their resources are moved up elsewhere, they want to make sure that the work they're supporting and investing in will continue. And so there's an empowerment of the local community and local person. So Isa Ibambolo is one of those. He was a partner in one of a partner group in Zambia, and looking at the conflict that he was seeing in his community, in his village, and his tribe, and said, we can try and address this issue, kind of what's manifesting, or we can just look at root causes. And he said, to do that, we need to start with the children. And so they began these peace clubs in schools, elementary schools, just teaching very basic conflict studies, very basic techniques for resolving conflict and respect and dignity. And it worked. And it worked so well that these peace clubs began spreading across Zambia. And I think I'm correct, Mira, you may know this, but other agencies, even other governments, said, we're coming to MCC and a partner said, can you bring this to our country? Can you bring this to our village? Can you bring this to our school? And so peace clubs are just spreading across Africa, including in prisons, so schools and prisons, which is really exciting. So just very quickly, where in the world is MCC? We're currently in about 45 countries, and you can see the list on the screen here. I just want to note, I have Afghanistan and North Korea underlined. We have, I don't know that we currently have staff in Afghanistan or North Korea, but we have them available. They're there, and we're waiting for the kind of the government's situation in Afghanistan with the Taliban to kind of settle down before we move. But we have partners there, and that's one of the beauties of this the approach of using partners, that even when North American MCC staff can't be present, our partners can be present, and we can find ways to funnel resources and support into them. So in Afghanistan, I think there are programs on health and education, particularly education for girls. And that's, let me just make a little quick side note there. Education is one of the areas that we work in, and often it's education for girls in contexts where girls typically would not have access to education. North Korea, for a long time, for a number of years, we have been in North Korea with supplying food, particularly to pediatric hospitals. One of the issues facing the North Korean population is protein deficiency, and so the meat, MCC has its meat canning process, which I'll talk a little about later. And so we were supplying meat, these canned meat, to North Korean hospitals through careful relationships that we had cultivated. We've had, during the times when we were in North Korea, sometimes we would get feedback. Oh, you're working in North Korea. You're working with our enemy. No, we're working with people, and we had developed trust with the organizations, with our partners in North Korea. We're getting food into these hospitals, and we had even. I think it's been a while, but we had even coordinated some agricultural exchange programs with farmers in North Korea and farmers in Canada. So we're looking for opportunities wherever we can. Anyway, you can see the rest of these countries. One of the things that MCC had done a few years ago, we used to be in many more countries, probably closer to 60, but we realized that it's probably better to go deeper than wider. We can go wider and just go kind of at a very low depth, or we can go deeper into fewer situations, and that's kind of the model that we're looking at. Just a few numbers. I mentioned we're in 45 countries. We have 381 partner organizations, approximately 500 different projects. You see the number of workers there, and around issues of relief, food, water, health, education, migration, and peace. Some more numbers. Earlier I mentioned the comforters, which is a way for people to connect with the work that MCC is doing. We also have this a program of kits, people putting kits together. We have relief kits, hygiene kits, comforters, school kits, canned meat. And again, this is a way for people, I'll say, people in the pews to say, I can't go and serve there. Maybe I can't give a whole lot. Just to note that MCC's ministry, they're over on the table there. You can see one of our annual reports. So all the resources for this, all the funds that are needed are just raised from individuals and churches and groups and donors. It's pretty amazing the way God provides. But some folks, I can't give, but I can put these kits together. So we have cards that list things we want for our kids, and then the school kits, notebook, pencil, very simple things, hygiene kits. One thing that, and I don't have it on my slide here, and I apologize, one thing that we've recently begun, which I'm excited about, is something called dignity kits. And what the dignity kits are, we realize that one of the problems I spoke about often in many developing countries, it's the girls who lack education, who lack access to education. And often, sometimes, it's because during their menstrual cycle, they either there's cultural taboos about them being in school, or this personal sense of shame, so they skip out, they miss a lot of school. And so these, because they don't have access to feminine hygiene products. So MCC says, okay, let's think about this. What can we do to help these girls stay in school? And so we've developed with some other entities washable and durable and washable hygiene products, and we put this together with towel and soap, and these girls have these buckets that they can use, and then they can stay in school. So it's pretty exciting, and there's stories I can tell you about that. I want to tell you a quick story about school kits, and this is one of my favorite stories. So the school kits often end up in, like I said, refugee camps, other places where children don't have access to school materials, and it's very simple: notebook, a ruler, pens or pencils, and crayons, and that sort of thing. So, and this story starts. MCC's been doing it for many years. This story starts in the 1970s in a refugee camp in Thailand. There was a young woman named Lee Vang, Lee, L-Y-V-A-N-G. She's part of the Hmong people. Spent most of her childhood in a refugee camp, and had been there for many years, and had reached a point where she had, and in her words, had nearly given up on life. She was from a Christian family, but she did not see God at work. She did not see God present, so she was ready to take her own life. One day she noticed there was a commotion in the refugee camp, and she saw some people handing out something. Well, so why not get in line for whatever's being handed out? She didn't know who it was, what it was, but it was a diversion from the drudgery of living in a refugee camp. And so she received a bag, a drawstring bag. It had a notebook, it had a pencil, it had a ruler, and things like this. And so she was delighted. It also had a heart embroidered on the front of this colorful bag. She didn't know where it came from, but she had this notebook. She began writing letters for people in the refugee camp who couldn't write, who were trying to find relatives. So she would write the letters and send them off. She would copy down scripture and songs that she would share with others. She took this ruler pad and made lines in between the lines so she could get more words on. And so suddenly she had purpose. And as she said, the school kit saved my life. Flash forward 30 years. Eventually her family found their way to Canada, were resettled in a community near Ontario, in Ontario, Canada. And she became part of a Mennonite church there, and eventually developed some leadership skills. She was leading the youth in this church. And one day she said, we need to help our youth learn about serving others. And she said, so let's go to, there's Mennonite Central Committee had a building there close by where people could put kits together, make comforters and do this sort of thing. So she said, I'm going to have our youth go and put kits together. So she gets there and she sees the kits, she sees the drawstring bags, and she realized at that moment that what had saved her life 30 years ago was an MCC school kit. So she went home and she still has the bag, and she talks about when she left the refugee camp, everything she owned went in that bag here. Anyway, it's just an amazing story. That's one story out of 55, almost 56,000 school kids. This is last year. And you multiply that by 30 or 40 years, there's hundreds of thousands, not millions of school kids out there. We don't know the stories of the life they impacted, but that's one story, and I'm sure that sort of story is multiplied many times over. Oh, one more story about comforters. This is another, I just love this story. So this was, comforters were being distributed again in a refugee camp in Jordan. These were Syrian refugees. And the comforters were being handed out. And the folks handing out noticed this young boy, 8 or 10, coming in. He was just smiling and delight and just jubilant. And they asked him, what are you so happy about? And his response was, he said, my mother and father, my brothers, a brother and a mother and father, before them, we have only one blanket. So at night, my brother and I put the blanket on to get warm so we can go to sleep. But then when my parents want to go to sleep, they take the blanket, put it on themselves so they can go to sleep. Then we get cold and we get the blanket. And he said, but now he said, we have 2 blankets. He said, we're rich. And he went running off with his comforter that some little old lady somewhere had put together very carefully. Anyway, I could tell there's many stories, but let me go on. I want to share some of our priorities as we begin our second century of service. I mentioned we were formed in 1920, so 2 years ago we had a big 100th year anniversary that got disrupted by COVID, but we are beginning our second century of relief, development, and peace in Christ. So here are 3 priorities that we want to focus on. Increasing the capacity of our partners, and again, let me just underline that word partners. We always work with partners, and we want to support and sustain them as much. Increase the capacity of our partners to help uprooted and vulnerable people, that 117 million people I mentioned earlier, who are either internally displaced or refugees. We want to increase our capacity to work with that. We want to care for God's creation and supporting communities harmed by climate change. We're recognizing that a lot of what we're seeing, a lot of our work is a result of climate change and weather patterns changing that folks are working with. We want to increase our peace building and justice work. So those are 3 things that are kind of guiding our work in this as we begin our second century. And just some examples. Again, I'm not going to say all these names, but I want you to know that we know the names of the women that you see pictured here. In a refugee camp in South Sudan, working with a partner. In fact, in this case, I think it was an Episcopalian group that we're working with, supporting a monthly food allotment at a refugee camp. We recognize that this sort of work is going to continue and become even more important. We want to care for God's creation. So let me just tell you the story of Eulalia Lopez on his organic farm in San Marcos, Guatemala. I was actually there and I actually took this picture. So it was a great time to experience work at MCC. So MCC is working with this farming co-op in the western mountainous regions of Guatemala. And there's several things happening in this photo that I want to share about that MCC is working with. One is they're working against the impact of climate change. And the way Eulalio and his family talked about it, he said, it used to rain, let me back up. They say the amount of rain we get hasn't changed, but how we get the rain has changed. And so as it used to be, we get rain over 10 weeks from April into May, right when we're planting. Now it comes in 3 days or something. And so if we plant too early, the plants get washed away. If we plant too late, we can't get in because the fields are muddy. So we're working with this farming co-op to develop planting methods and farming methods that help capture rain and terracing. All this is a very mountainous regions. And interestingly, one of the things we're doing in connection with this group is helping these farmers reappropriate the farming methods of their Mayan ancestors. So Guatemala is, a lot of it's Mayan ancestry. And what's happened though in between then is you have big agriculture coming in and saying, this is how you need to farm with these seeds and these fertilizers, and you pour more fertilizer on, and that's how you, in the meantime, so that just is kind of wiping away the farming methods of their Mayan ancestors. So this co-op that MCC is working with is helping them kind of reclaim those. So going back into organic, reducing the amount of fertilizer, and Eulalio was very, very proud to share with us that there's not an ounce of chemicals on his land. And then he's working with climate change. And let me just mention climate change, because climate change is affecting the ability of farmers in his region to grow land, to grow food, to provide for themselves and their families and their communities. And it's impacting young people, young adults who are looking for a future. We talked to a youth group in San Marcos, a group of young adults, high school students. And the one young man said, when the school year started, this was May of last year, so the school year is about to end. He said, when the school year started, there were 350 of us in our school. He said, there are 75 now. Everyone else has gone north, has left, has become a refugee, if you will, looking for work. And so that was a very powerful moment. You hear a lot of discussion and pontificating here about refugees who are coming across our southern border, and the vast majority of them are folks like this young people who say, I have no future here because there's no jobs, the climate is changing, and so anyway. So we're caring for God's creation and supporting communities harmed by climate change. Increasing peace building and justice work. This is an exciting project. Again, you see the names. I won't read them all. But what I will note is that these are in Malawi. The Malawian women there are staff members at a women's prison there in Zomba, Malawi. And Amanda, the rep in the middle, had worked with them to bring these peace clubs into the prison, working at conflict resolution among the prisoners there at this camp. So they help with restorative justice and peace building workshop. Again, working at root causes. We can put the Band-Aids on the surface, but that's not going to help if we're not working at the root causes and rooting out the infection, as it were. So what I have now is a series of short videos. So give my voice rest and put here other people explain. So there's some videos. These first two are about climate change and how we can work at that. So I'm just gonna let you listen to what these folks have to say.
There are things we can do as individuals, but then also kind of seeking collective solutions is also super important.
That's a very important point there.
And that's something that we definitely all can wrestle with. But we need to work to make this a conversation that isn't divisive. If you wait for the world to move, then the world is not going to move. And yet that doesn't mean we can't try and do it.
It was in 2021, we had a climate, we called a climate ride. There's a group of young adults who rode from Seattle to Washington DC, then in DC met with legislators. Again, it's providing a way for young adults to say, I don't have a lot of money to give, but I can give some time. I do bike riding. I'm willing and able to amplify that message. So this is another video about the impact of climate change on some of the farmers that we work with. And I don't know if you caught that one line in there earlier where it said, working with the impact of climate change among countries who are least responsible for that climate change. So we in North America are taking some responsibility for this.
Todo se llevó el techo, todo, en Estados Unidos se hace todo también. Las paredes también. Era las 2 de la noche. Bueno, aquí ya estaba lleno. Aquí estaba lleno. Ya arriba, donde los cajas abiertas, si no, ahí para irnos fue.
Try it. Okay.
My sweet potatoes this year are not doing well, as you can see, right? Drought mainly affects sweet potatoes by making them not to develop tubers that we can eat. There is less rain, there is no yield, no proper yield that you can get.
Okay, this is about a peace. This is a video now about peacemaking and some of the peace clubs.
Kuna tatizo au conflict ambayo nimewahi kutatua hapo ambayo ilikuwa kati ya watu wawili, president wa plage na chef au notable wa kile kijiji cha Yamba. Alafu yule chef wa kijiji alikuwa anatuma watu 5 kwenda kukongoa samaki kwa yule president wa plage. Sasa presidenti wa plage akaona kama ni kero inasumbua. Mtu mmoja anaweza kuwa anapewa taksi, anatuma watu 5 waende wakongoe usudi yeye akwetu na rizika na wengine wanakosa zile samaki. Ule presidenti wa plage akasema, kwa hiyo wakati sitawapa tena zile samaki za watu 5, ila mwambie yule notable anitumie mtu huyu mmoja ambaye atakuwa na kongola zile samaki kwa ajili yake. Sasa wale watu ambao chef alikuwa anatuma kwa president wa plage wakaenda kumwambia nani shefu kama president wa plage alisema hata kupatiaka tena samaki. Wakati yule president wa yule notable alisikia ile habari la kasikia kama vile inamsumbua muro yake, na akafikia kusema mie kama vile mkubwa wa kijiji ninaweza kuimiwa samaki namna gani na katoto sawa kali vile, na ni polisi ije imchukue yule president wa plage. Tension ilikuwa ishakuwa mbaya kabisa, kijiji kyote kilikuwa kishakuwa na alert. Wale waroaji wale wapesheri walikuwa tayari wameshazunguka ile eneo yote ya prison, wanasema wanataka kuunguza ile kijiji yote na moto. Lakini tulijitahidi kwenda kuna kituo cha polisi ambao wamemfunga yule president wa plage. Alafu yeye president wa plage akasema mimi sikukataa kumpatia notable samaki, ila nilikataa asilete watu 5. Tukatuma mtu akaenda kumuita chief, akakuya historia jinsi ilienda kama viko namna gani. Notable akasema yule mtoto yule kijana yule president wa plage iko empoli sana, ana adabu, na mule mprizo atakoma mpaka siku atajiuliza mimi niko naye. Na wakati nilianza kuzungumza mambo ya kuleta amani, namna gani watu wanapaswa kuishi kwa amani, ule notable alisimama pale kukiti na maana yake akapiga kumeza, hakuna mambo ya amani hapa, mshakaona banadamu wapi wewe ataleta amani, mpaka Mungu na shetani wakutanane pamoja ndio watu watapata amani. Nikaanza sasa kumuelewesha, kumuonesha umuhimu wa watu kukaa kwa amani. Sasa ikikuwa yeye ambaye ni mkubwa wa kijiji tena anaanza anakuwa na makonfli na wale watu wengi iko na chunga, na watu wengine watafikia hata kukimbia kile kijiji chake, watakimbia watasema huyu shefu ni wa mubaya, na wanaanza wanasambaratika kwenda zingine eneo. Mimi naona nakubali kumsamehe, lakini mumshaurie, mumuelezee kama anapaswa kuwa anaheshimia wakubwa ambao wanamkoza. Mimi niko tu mkubwa kwenye iko na anapaswa kuniheshimu. Na hapo tuko pale, akakamata telefone akamuita komanda wa polisi usudi amutoshe ule president wa plage ule mkuu. So ndio anaanza sema ile alianza sema mwanamke nao watachangia kwa kuleta amani. Ninaweza kumuonyesha kama mwanamke naye anaweza akachangia kwa kuleta amani katika nchi au katika kijiji.
And I can't overstate enough how often it is women who are helping us solve these things. Ours is not advanced, sorry.
Ego.
Okay, this is another video about how working with women and girls is at the root of having change.
They treat us like their own child, you know. Yeah, they've got love.
When we started the whole thing of Summer Johnson, it was really basically to help those that have been sexually abused and they were going through different traumas. But then in that process, we came across young girls that they'd never been to school. So that's how then Summer Johnson Center then decided we intervene in their lives by giving them some form of skill.
I learned how to grow tomatoes, to grow cabbage, green peppers, vegetables, and how to manage them.
We were just thinking of if we can just equip them, give them something that when they leave us, they're able to continue with their lives.
They can manage a big space all by myself. Yeah, even I can manage this greenhouse alone.
For us, it's important to educate the girl child And also what we have seen by helping the girls' child, you're almost helping the whole family. Most girls are the ones that go back and are able to help their siblings. They are able to help the mom and dad if mom and dad are struggling. They have that mentality that there's a man out there that is going to help me. But once they are here, they know that they can stand on their own 2 feet.
When you don't know how to do all these things, men can take advantage of us. They thought that we don't know how to do anything by ourselves. So we have to do it so that we don't suffer in future. I also realized that I have a skill to do agriculture. Yeah, because I never imagined myself doing all these kind of things. But now I know that this thing, I can do it. Now I'm proud of myself and I'm confident that I can do it.
So again, part of the work that MCC is doing here is recognizing that if we're going to affect long-term change, sometimes we need to, again, work the roots. And the young woman you saw here, who knows how many generations of people are going to be empowered through what she experienced. These next 2 videos are about some of the things we're doing. A lot of what I have shown here is about things we're doing around the world. But MCC is working here in the US, and one of the things that we're working at is just talking about the doctrine of discovery and the impact that has on us as a country, and so forth. And then a video about our work with immigration. So yeah, listen to this.
America does not teach its own history. America teaches a mythology. We didn't discover this land, we dehumanized it. What we called expansion was actually ethnic cleansing. And the liberty and justice we love to tout, our own documents, our own founding documents, state those only exist for a very narrowly defined few. Our Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages.
I know the history I received in school was just the basic Nina Pinta Santa Maria, Christopher Columbus, and then we learned about some of the local tribes, but it was maybe a week of learning. I think the history that MCC presents on Indigenous people is different because they're intertwining the mix of church and Indigenous history. It's also important for people of Mennonite faith, Mennonite background, to see that the Mennonite church maybe didn't directly do the harm, but has benefited and continues to benefit from the harm.
The doctrine of discovery essentially is a series of papal bulls that is the Catholic Church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by Christian rulers, those people are less than human and the land's yours for the taking. So
I just want to note, I just read recently that the Pope has issued a statement starting to repudiate this doctrine of discovery. So the Catholic Church, what he's saying there, I mean, before you say, oh, the Catholic Church, they are looking at this, they're doing an internal look, and the Pope has made a statement repudiating the doctrine of discovery.
Foundations of our nation are all systemically racist. They all assume Native peoples and people of color are not fully human. What do we do with this? How do we acknowledge this, both as a church and as Americans, and how do we move forward?
Well, Return to the Earth was a project started by Lawrence Hart, asking MCC to join in and to repatriate unidentifiable Native remains. And so Lawrence's dream was to get these remains and have Mennonites be a part of the reconciliation process by building burial boxes, and that we would put these remains back into the ground. And it says a lot about Mennonites who are willing to do this work and do these processes of reconciliation. But I think what we realize now is that we didn't really do the full education and didn't look back to the doctrine of discovery.
There's an Aboriginal leader, his name is George Erasmus, and he says that where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, you You have to start by creating common memory.
I think restorative justice plays a critical role, and I would say we never had a just relationship to begin with. So what does it look like to bring that in? And I think right now it means we tell the truth about our history. It recalls knowing your own history enough. And so looking into the land you grew up on, it means looking into church history, it means looking at American history. I think just looking for that education to further your own knowledge base, instead of always looking to a Native person to reteach you.
I have one more video to show if I can get to it. And then we'll have some time for questions. Another issue that MCC is working at locally, kind of stateside, in addition to awareness of darkness discovery, is mass incarceration, and also immigration. I have a video on immigration, but we're running short on time. I don't want to leave room for questions. But I want you, this is again another thing that MCC is working at, just building awareness of something we call the school to prison pipeline, some of the issues around mass incarceration. So I invite you again to watch this, and then I think I'll stop and get some time for questions.
Things had changed. Getting out of prison I was excited, but I was fearful because things had changed. It wasn't the same place that I left. I had been going for 10 years.
How do we walk with folks who have been incarcerated and are now in our community? What does it mean for housing? What does it mean for food? What does it mean for them to find a job?
I think one of the things that we have to do is get out of the spirit of America and get back to what Christians are supposed to be. We're called to love those who are different.
Our mandate as Christians deals with responding to injustice. We can't say like Micah 6:8 and say we love mercy, we want to do justice. No, I think part of our work is to respond, to identify what is injustice, and then respond to undo injustice by exposing it and by walking with those who have been victims of the injustice.
We are followers of Jesus, and how would Jesus walk in what he said? So that which you did for the least of these, you did also unto me. So that means we all have work to do. So one of the biggest things the church has to understand, the church has to get to work. And we've been sitting on the sidelines just a little too long. It's time for us to get to work.
I think I'll stop there. There's a lot more I could say, and I think you've gathered the breadth and depth of what MCC is doing around the world, and or as I like to say, around the world and across the street is pretty amazing. I could spend, I could spend another month of Sundays talking about that. But we have 10 minutes left. Are there some questions, some points of clarification? Yes, Jack.
What are some examples of partner organizations?
I don't know that I can name, but I can give some types of. So, like I mentioned, the gentleman Eulalia Lopez from San Marcos, Guatemala. So there we were working with a local farmers co-op, which was in turn kind of sponsored or originated within the local Catholic diocese. So this was a Catholic diocese that had put this group together, a cooperative to allow these farmers to share expertise, to cooperate in marketing their products, that sort of thing. So that was the partner organization that we worked with. I want to say just something about partners. When I was in Guatemala, it struck me. We often talk about, in MCC language, our partner organizations. And if we're not careful, it sounds like these organizations are partnering with us in our work. Our country rep in Guatemala said, encouraged me to think about it in other ways. He said, we're partnering, actually said it's probably more accurate to talk about us partnering with them in their work. Kind of like we say, when we go, just in terms of Christian mission in general, we often sometimes say, well, we invite God to partner with us in our work, when it's really, how are we partnering with the work that God is doing already? So that's one thing. Sometimes it's churches. I know a lot in South Africa, we're working with the Brethren in Christ Church, some of their missions. The Malawi prison thing I mentioned, that was an organization I think is either Episcopal or Lutheran, so sometimes church groups that are already there. It's not always Christian groups. Sometimes it's Muslim or Hindu groups, but they share the values and we work with them. So it can be a local village co-op, it can be a church group, it can be maybe a teachers group or an education project. So it's a wide variety from church to civic groups that are invested in their community that we then walk alongside.
And a quick follow-up, if you had a disaster like was in Haiti, and there's a lot of organizations pouring into Haiti for aid, how do they distribute that aid? I mean, you don't all want to be in one place necessarily. There has to be almost like communication between groups.
There is. In many of these countries with natural disasters, there's an implicit understanding, okay, you, MCC, will take this region. Presbyterian group will take this region, so it's geographic. Yeah, there is communication. And for us, I think one of the benefits for MCC, like for Haiti, for example, when a disaster strikes, we have staff people there, partners there. We often have supplies kind of pre-positioned. So when a disaster strikes, we don't have to go in thinking, okay, who's going to get this aid? We have our partner organizations, they have their distribution networks, and it's much more fluid and dynamic than us just dumping stuff in, and then the community is burdened with, well, what do we do with this stuff? So that's one of the benefits of our partner process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
With relation to the projects that MCC is doing, is there information available on where the clean water projects are happening?
I can get that. There are a number of different places. On the table back here, I have our annual report that might list some of them. But we do issue reports just on our water. I'll find a way to get that to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, if you can get it to me,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes.
Have you noticed, I kept hearing your comment that women seem to be the go-to group if you want to get something done. Do you find that the same here in this country as you do in other countries? And if so, why are we so hesitant to put them in charge and move faster?
Mira, do you want to answer that question?
I don't think there's time in the century.
Come on, women have all the power. Are they using it?
I mean, one of the things we I'm just gonna step aside and let you two. One of the things we do within MCC is to try and be very, very aware of distribution of power, both within our organization. So we're aware of that. One of the things I didn't mention is that MCC for the past decade or two has really been doing some soul searching and introspection around power on racial dynamics within MCC in terms of staff. So we're paying attention to that. We're looking at imbalance of power both within the U.S., within our staff, within our structure, and so whether or not it's an issue of women, whether or not it's an issue of race, we're paying attention to that. But I'm struck too, and I haven't done enough research and reading them, but in some of our international programs, it is the women often. Sometimes because the women are most are most inordinately impacted by a situation. One quick story, which you talk about water. It's often women who bear the burden of water collection.
Right.
Because that's just the cultural roles. And this one story, MCC used to have a program of creating what's called sand dams, where it's a water collection system. And the story of a girl, 12, 13 years old, who said, I used to spend 7 hours a day fetching water. Think 7 hours a day. So that meant she had no access to education. That was another whole bit. But then the sand dam came in nearby, and she said, oh, she's so happy. I only have to spend 3 hours a day collecting water, which still is crazy. But yeah, we're paying attention to that and working with our partners who are addressing that.
Two things here. There's a group we've supported for years. I don't know that we still do or not, but it's called Living Waters for the World. And what they do is they bring in water purification systems so that to address that directly. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the blanket, the comforters, if you will. There is an advantage to having been poor in the sense that one of the central things in my family history was quilting. And most notably the patchwork quilts, where you use the clothes that were just too worn out to use for clothes, and you sewed them together in patchwork fashion and made these wonderful blankets and to stay warm in the winter. And
Objects of art even.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, they were, but the thing that happens around a quilting frame, that community that gets built, the constant banter